Hi there. I'm really excited about your long form projects, and I want to give you some last tips that might help you in creating and structuring your piece so it can be a really positive experience and can get used on some public radio station. So, just to refresh you, some key elements you want to make sure you have, and that is a character, a person who's going to hold the story, somebody who's going to be interesting for 3.5 minutes. Lots of voices telling the story, which means short tracks for you. Natural sound throughout, beginning, middle, different places to use as transitions and just to keep the listener's interest. A strong anchor lead. This one should be longer than it has been for our 40-second stories to build up the story, to help the listener know the topic, to kind of set the scene. So a couple, 3 sentences. Also think about, is there some context, some so what that you have in your story, some universal theme or emotion? Set this person in the context of others or appeal to some emotion that everybody can understand. Good writing, obviously, with idioms, good phrasing, engaging words, and then you have a chance to do some really good voicing, to voice and check and revoice, make sure you don't have any popped P's, and really work with your voice to get really strong tracks. Couple of strategies. Somebody told me once, if you can't say your story focus in a clear sentence, then you haven't thought enough about it. You don't have a story. So make sure you have a clear focus. You know what this story is about and know the beginning, what you're going to do in the middle, and then how you're going to build to an interesting close. And also, we've just been doing reports and throwing a lot of information in those 40-second stories, but now's your chance to be a little more creative. Think more like a children's bedtime story, once upon a time, than an informational report. Think about story and storytelling. You might go step by step or scene by scene, but generally you wouldn't go chronologically. I'll talk about the altered chronology in a moment. Another concept to think about as you're parsing things out is indexing one issue or topic at a time rather than going back and forth, and even one person at a time. Leave that person and don't come back. Generally, won't always work, but generally, because in radio, people can't look back and see who that person is up higher in the web story. So if you do use somebody and then use them 2 minutes later and your listener may not remember, you might need to say, John, he's his best friend, to explain again who somebody is. Think about transitions to help lead from one point or one section to another. Meanwhile, but over at the office, people were doing blah, blah, blah. And the hardest part is always what to leave out. You've got so much good stuff. What is just essential? And what can you do in 3.5 minutes? Think about your natural sound. It can be a scene setter to open up the story and help take us to the football stadium or take us to the plant where they're making the product. It could be gnats of a crowd. It could be something used for mood or a time period. Jim Boeheim started coaching in, and there's music from was it the 70s when he started? Boeheim started coaching when blah, blah, blah was the top hit, and a hamburger costs 35 cents. Just something to help the time period. Or you can use it as a transition device when there's not an easy way through words to go from one to another. Put in some natural sound of office sounds and then go talk about the office as a lead in to the next segment. Could also be used at the end, as a couple of people have, even between your sig out of finishing out or you're building to some kind of sound. There are several common structure models. If it helps, this might help you structure things. Others of you are just creative and it just flows naturally in your own storytelling. But if you're like me and you have that logical mind, the particular to general model, you start out with a particular person and then you generalize because that person represents something bigger. So you start with the individual, you talk about the problem or the issue or the concern, then you link that person to he's one of 1,000 or he's one of a kind or he's one of many, and then you have more facets and angles to the story, might go to solutions, and then you come back to that person again. This is sometimes called the pregnant eye or the bookend model, where the person starts and ends the story. Another one is the altered chronology. It's good for a social issue, might be good for a follow-up. You start with what's happening now or some part of the story, and then you go back in time and tell how we got to this place with the details. And you usually would conclude with the future or what's the next step. If you're doing that, you might need some archival audio or some creative way to think about how to tell that past history or get people to talk about that. Sometimes it's helpful to have two people tell you about the same thing and intercut their audio back and forth so together they tell the story. And here's where you want to select your sound for feeling, not necessarily for fact. And the support for your main points here might come more through your narration than in a profile or another kind of story where you'd get a lot from your sound bites. There could be a cause and effect model or a problem solution model. Here's the problem. We have poverty in the city. Sometimes you want to do that through the eyes of one person. What is the conflict? Tell more about it. Explain the nuances. It's not all black and white, the areas of gray. Here are the different solutions or options, and then some perhaps evaluation for them or a way to resolve what the conflict is at the end. There's also the three-element structure, which can work for profiles. You think of three different elements of the person's life. Element 1, transition to element 2, transition to element 3, and then some pithy kind of close to tie it all together. And that close, in this case, we do need, unlike the web stories, we do need some kind of close. Don't make it trite, don't give me an only time will tell, but try to pull the themes or the threads. And closes for me are the hardest thing to write, much harder than leads. And I would spend days trying to figure out what was the best way to close a story. So if you're having trouble with that, you're just like me. Good luck on your stories. I am really eager to see your drafts and to help polish them to be a really good piece.